The pharmacist's voice carries across the crowded store. "We don't take military discount cards from people who look perfectly fine to me." 54-year-old Marine Colonel David Chen stands frozen at the counter, his prosthetic leg hidden beneath dark jeans, while a line of customers watches him fumble for his Purple Heart citation that he keeps folded in his wallet for moments. Exactly like this. What happens next will restore your faith in humanity. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments about a veteran who changed your life. These heroes deserve our respect. David Chen needed his medication. Simple as that. The VA pharmacy was closed for repairs, so he drove 20 minutes to the nearest chain pharmacy on a Tuesday afternoon. He walked slowly through the automatic doors, his right leg moving with the careful precision that came with years of practice hiding his disability. The pharmacy counter stretched before him like a battlefield. Behind it stood Rick Morrison, a thin man in his 30s who wore his white coat like armor and his attitude like a weapon. The afternoon rush had begun, and 12 people waited in line behind David, their conversations creating a buzz of background noise that would soon turn into something much more uncomfortable. David approached the counter and placed his prescription bottle on the surface. The medication inside rattled softly. He reached into his worn leather wallet and pulled out his military ID card, placing it next to the bottle. Rick barely glanced at the card before pushing it back across the counter, with 2 fingers like it might contaminate him. "That military discount stuff is for people who actually need it," Rick said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You look fine to me. Are you going to pay full price or not?" David felt heat rise in his cheeks. The prosthetic leg suddenly felt heavier, more obvious, even though nobody could see it beneath his jeans. He cleared his throat and spoke quietly. "I am a veteran. This is my prescription. I have the right to use my benefits." Rick rolled his eyes dramatically and turned to his coworker, a young woman named Sarah who was counting pills nearby. "Get a load of this guy," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Another fake veteran trying to get free stuff." The customers behind David began to stir. Someone whispered something about entitlement. Another person sighed loudly and checked their phone. David could feel dozens of eyes boring into his back like laser sights. Rick leaned forward on the counter, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "Look, buddy, I see real veterans come in here all the time. Missing arms, wheelchairs, obvious injuries. You walked in here just fine. So either pay the full $47 or step aside and let real customers get their medicine." David's hands began to shake slightly, not from fear, but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that used to keep him alive in combat zones. He had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, had led troops through the most dangerous regions of the country, had saved lives and taken lives when necessary. But standing in this pharmacy, surrounded by impatient civilians, he felt more exposed than he ever had in any firefight. A woman in the line behind him spoke up. "Just pay and get out of the way. Some of us have real jobs to get back to." Another customer joined in. "Yeah, if you can walk around fine, you should pay like everyone else." Rick smiled at the support from the crowd. He straightened his white coat and crossed his arms. "See? Even these nice people can tell you are not what you claim to be. Now cash or card for the full amount." David reached into his wallet again, this time pulling out a folded piece of paper that had been handled so many times the creases were wearing thin. He unfolded it carefully on the counter. "This is my Purple Heart citation," he said quietly. Rick glanced at the paper and laughed. "Oh please. You can print anything off the internet these days. Do you think we were born yesterday?" The laughter from the crowd was like salt in an open wound. David closed his eyes for a moment and tried to remember what his therapist had taught him about breathing techniques. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. But it was not working. The walls of the pharmacy seemed to be closing in. A teenage boy near the back of the line called out, My dad actually served in Iraq, and he does not go around waving papers at people for discounts." More voices joined in. The pharmacy had become a courtroom, and David was on trial for crimes he had never committed. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. He was a fraud, a faker, a man trying to steal benefits he had not earned. Rick was clearly enjoying the show. He turned to Sarah again, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know what really gets me? Real heroes do not need to prove themselves like this. They have dignity." David felt something crack inside his chest. 26 years of military service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, countless nights away from his family. The IED explosion. That took his leg and nearly his life. The months of physical therapy, learning to walk again, fighting every day to look normal so people would not stare or pity him. And now this. He looked around the pharmacy at all the faces staring back at him. Soccer moms with their arms crossed. Business people tapping their feet. Elderly customers shaking their heads in disapproval. They had already decided what kind of person he was based on 30 seconds of observation. The noise level was rising as more people began to voice their opinions. Someone suggested he was probably homeless. Another person wondered if his military ID was stolen. A man in an expensive suit said loudly that this was exactly what was wrong with America today. Everyone wanting something for nothing. David began to roll up his right pant leg. "Hey, what are you doing?" Rick demanded, suddenly looking uncomfortable. For the first time, David did not answer. He kept rolling the fabric higher, revealing first his sock, then his ankle. Then something that made the entire pharmacy fall silent. The prosthetic leg was military grade, designed for maximum functionality and minimum visibility. But now, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the pharmacy, its titanium and carbon fiber construction was unmistakable. The mechanical ankle joint caught the light. The place where flesh met metal at his knee was covered by a specialized sleeve that could not hide the fundamental truth of what lay beneath. The silence stretched out like a held breath. David finished rolling up his pant leg and stood straight, meeting Rick's eyes across the counter. "I lost this leg to an IED outside Kandahar while leading a convoy to deliver medical supplies to a remote village," David said quietly. "The explosion killed 2 of my Marines instantly. I spent 8 months learning to walk again so I could look normal enough that people like you would not stare." Rick's face had gone pale. The crowd behind David was now completely silent, many of them looking at their shoes or suddenly finding their phones very interesting. But David was not finished. He reached into his wallet one more time and pulled out a small leather case. Inside was a medal that caught the light like captured sunlight. The Purple Heart, with its distinctive profile of George Washington, rested on purple and white ribbon. That had been carefully maintained for over a decade. "This is not a printout from the internet," David continued, his voice steady now. "This is what they gave me after I woke up in the hospital and learned I would never run again. Never play sports with my son again. Never walk on the beach with my wife without people wondering what was wrong with me." He closed the case and put it back in his wallet, then began rolling his pant leg back down. The simple action took longer than it should have, and everyone in the pharmacy watched every movement. A woman near the front of the line stepped forward. She was older, maybe 70, with gray hair and kind eyes that had suddenly filled with tears. "Excuse me," she said to Rick, her voice shaking with emotion. "I think you owe this man an apology." Rick looked around desperately, as if searching for support that was no longer there. The crowd that had been so eager to judge David just minutes before now stood in uncomfortable silence. But it was not over yet. From the back of the line came a voice that cut through the tension like a blade. "Marines, attention." Every head turned toward the sound. A man in his 60s was pushing through the crowd, and as he got closer, David could see the tattoo on his forearm. Eagle, globe, and anchor. Once a Marine, Always a Marine. The man reached the front of the line and stopped directly in front of David. Without hesitation, he raised his hand in a crisp military salute. "Colonel Chun," the man said formally. "Sergeant Major Williams, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines." "It is an honor, sir." David's composure finally cracked. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he returned the salute, his hand steady despite everything. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed to change the very air in the pharmacy. Sergeant Major Williams turned to face Rick, and his expression was no longer respectful. This Marine commanded over 3,000 troops in combat, son. He brought more men home alive than you have probably met in your entire life. You should be ashamed of yourself. The older woman who had spoken earlier began to clap slowly. Then the person next to her joined in. Within moments, the entire pharmacy was applauding, and David stood there with tears streaming down his face while strangers who had been ready to condemn him now showed him the respect he had earned with his sacrifice. Rick fumbled with the prescription bottle, his hands shaking as he tried to process the medication. "No charge," he mumbled. "No charge at all. I am sorry, I did not know." David wiped his eyes and looked at Rick with something that might have been compassion. "Now you do," he said simply. As David left the pharmacy that day, medication in hand, he carried with him something more valuable than any discount. He carried the memory of Sergeant Major Williams stepping forward when it mattered most. He carried the sound of applause from strangers who learned to see past appearances to truth. And most importantly, he carried the reminder that his service still mattered, even when hidden beneath regular clothes and everyday struggles. Sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with dignity in the face of ignorance, and the courage to stand tall when the world tries to make you small. The real heroes walk among us every day, carrying invisible wounds and quiet strength. They deserve our recognition not just on holidays, but in pharmacies on Tuesday afternoons, when all they want is their medication and a little respect. That night, David called his son and told him the story. And for the first time in years, when his son asked if he was proud of his service, David did not hesitate before answering yes.